Please mute your mics, please. All of you, please.
Now, all that greetings, if you want to say to anybody, you may write it on the chat box and the person may have a look at it. And if at all you have anything to make as a statement, please write it there. We'll try to look at it and give you the response as and when it's possible. Thank you very much, sir. Please, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Arora. That's our presentation for the day, and it's 5 p.m. sharp. We have a minute. We have maybe less than a minute, and that could give us. Deshmukh has come in. Geeta Deshmukh also has come in. 1 or 2 seconds. Sir, there are 3 people in the waiting room and right in front of my screen. That's right, sir.
All right, sir. All right.
Dr. Tarsing, you have to be a little fast, sir.
My dear friends, before I start my presentation, I would request you to be very cautious. Very cautious in 2 cases. Number 1, a lot of my friends, very experienced people, wonderful trainers have been talking for the last several years on experiential learning. This model has been virtually torn into bits. People have been conducting workshops everywhere. And everywhere I have seen they were able to give it a basis, but its practical implications were almost forgotten. Everybody knows, and I'm sure you must be also knowing what experiential learning is. But then how to conduct experiential learning, and why was the need felt for conducting this kind of learning or this kind of teaching is a little difficult, and that's what I'm trying to say. So you will have to go along with me and bear with me for a little while. Maybe some tough concepts may come in between, and you can that time raise your hand or ask me a question. I'll stop, answer your question, or I'll answer your question at the end. I'm saving this entire chat so that even if there are some questions, I can send a handout to you with the answer to those questions. I start talking about experiential learning. Not only learning, but the model of this experiential learning. I begin with this and ask you, what is teaching? All of us have been teaching for many, many years now. Does teaching mean presenting information to the children? Does it mean stuffing, and stuffing? Does it mean giving them knowledge and asking them to hold it in their brains for maybe in their short-term memories or long-term memories? Vomit it in the examination and forget about it? Is that teaching? My teachers have never done that kind of a teaching, because they knew Professor Handu had a proverb which was his own. He had not borrowed it from anybody. That was, if learning does not happen in your class, I will say teaching has not been done. And they would tell me, sir, I have been teaching for a very long time. I have been teaching for a very long time, and I did wonderful, honest work in my classes. Why do you say that I have not taught? Beta, my answer is because the children have not learned. Teaching is a set of actions which must induce learning. It must cause learning. And if it does not cause learning, we have no claim to having said that we have been teaching. Learning must occur, and if learning occurs, well, then teaching has happened. A good facilitator, or I would say a great facilitator, a great teacher, what does he do? He first judges where the student is as on today, and he decides upon the goal where he has to take that student. The goal may be in terms of the information that has to be given to the child. It may be in terms of the behaviors that we want to be exhibited by the child, overt behavior, or it may be in terms of the skills that we want to develop in the child. So we have a starting point A and we have an end point B. The lot of work that we go through, the lot of strategies, techniques, pedagogy, methodologies that we adopt, the activities that we do, the technology that we use, that is all very valuable. It has a lot of value. But what matters ultimately is the end result. If all this goes waste, I mean, I would not say if, all this goes waste if the child has not learned. if the child has not acquired what we wanted, the skills that we wanted to develop, the information or the concepts that we wanted him to formulate, if he has not done that, we have lost. As a teacher, I would like all of you to get into this car and I would like to carry you to your destination. The destination will be reached by around 5:25 to 5:30. The destination is that you must have understood and you must be able to implement, you must be able to put into practice the experiential learning model in your classes. So my objective is absolutely very clear, and I must carry a good vehicle which is very attractive also to drive you down the destination. This bandwagon will not work now. We have been using it for a very long time. Unfortunately, this horse-drawn wagon is the methodology that we have been using, where the horses were predominantly our children, whom sometimes we would encourage, sometimes we would beg of them, sometimes we would warn and threaten them, sometimes we would coerce them, and we would not care about their experiences. We would never care how the horse felt. Was he really learning, or was he going along with us? Did he enjoy this learning or not? This is something very interesting. And those of you who have read a little about NLP or have read a little about brain-based learning should be knowing that the brain is always active. Even when we are asleep, the brain doesn't sleep. There's a lot of firing going on between the neurons in the brain, like cells. And you have billions of neurons. By age 80, you will not have lost many. The loss will not be more than 10%, I can tell you. It is these neurons that are responsible for connectivity among themselves, and that's how concepts are built. That's how assimilation occurs. That's how accommodation occurs. That's how rules and logic is built. Now, if there is an experience, you have an experience, I have an experience of something, the child has an experience, the chances are that 95% of his neurons are firing at one another. The connectivity is 95%. Instead, when you are making presentations in the class, which is purely verbal, the firing of the neurons is not more than 20%, and it can fall as low as 5%. This was given by J.W. Wilson in his wonderful book, Cracking the Learning Code. I would love, if you get some time, spare time, please buy this book, get one in the library and read it. So if we want the brain neurons to fire, we have to provide experience. There is something interesting that Howard Gardner, the gentleman who gave us the theory of multiple intelligences, said once. He said something which must be borne in mind, that we have some students whom we trained very well. They showed signs of success. Their attendance was very regular. They attended all the good schools, got very high grades. Their test scores were very good. And they won the praise and the admirations of their teachers. Later on in life, when we tried to find out that the concepts that we taught them, the materials that we taught them, were they good at it? We found that these concepts, they were not good at these concepts. The reason being that whatever was taught in the classes was taught orally, was taught using the audiovisual techniques, was taught using the DG board, but they were not given experiences at all. So even though the left side of the brain was very good, they did very well in their academic subjects. They scored very well. They were very regular. They thought, they gave proof of their logic being developed, but the concepts did not stay in the brain longer. They vanished. It's only when experience is given to a person that the concepts become permanently stored. Let us therefore change the paradigm. Change the paradigm means changing the strategies that we are teaching. Please remember that we are not only interested in understanding the paradigm. Firstly, we want to provide the children with a new vehicle, a vehicle which gives them joy, a methodology of teaching that makes learning joyful. We are talking of happy curriculum. I'll not refer to that here. I'll only say we must use a strategy. We must use a technique that keeps our children happy, which makes learning fun. Learning should not become a burden. Second, there are many barriers to learning. You have to unlock your barriers before you learn. If you draw a list yourself, what are the barriers to my learning? There can be noise. There can be your own genetic factors. There can be your own interest, lack of interest in the subject. Why don't we provide them the keys to open those locks, which would remove those barriers? And then as they move on their journey, because we are facilitators, we have to provide them with a very safe road, which is very clear, on which traveling is very easy. And that is what experiential learning is. But it's not discovery learning. Discovery learning is unstructured. In discovery learning, you leave a child and let him learn on his own. You allow him to learn what he can learn. That doesn't happen in experiential learning. In experiential learning, the teacher chooses an activity which is related to his content. He cannot an activity and then tell the children, we will be reading chapter 17 in the month of November, and I want you to go through this experience today. No. It is the chapter that is being dealt with today, the content that's being taught with today. The activity should be correlated with that concept, and it should have a specific objective, and it should be relevant. Then, when the children get into the activity or get into taking the experience, there should be total involvement. And the teacher does not ignore the classroom culture, whether the activity is done inside the classroom or outside the classroom. He ensures that the child has a safe environment. He ensures that he keeps on asking them questions. He ensures that the children are not only experiencing, they are reflecting upon the experience. My dear friends, please mark my words very carefully. This is why some of my trainers have not been able to go across with experiential learning. Experiential learning is not only an experience, it's a reflection on the experience. Unless you reflect on what you experienced, unless you think about that experience and share that experience with others, you will not be able to hypothesize, you will not be able to theorize, and you will not be able to apply this experience in future. Now, this is something very interesting. A physicist, the greatest of all, Einstein, saying, knowledge is experience, everything else is just information. Whatever you provide to the child is information. He gathers knowledge by not giving information to him, but through experiential learning only. And then what did Sophocles do? Might not have, many of you, my dear friends, might not have heard of him. He was a Greek tragedian, a Greek dramatist, as good as Shakespeare. Aeschylus and Sophocles, they were the two great tragedians who wrote tragedies. For example, if you have heard of Oedipus complex, Electra complex, or the story of Oedipus, Sophocles was the writer. Although the character Oedipus comes from Homer, but Sophocles was the writer. What did he say? One must learn by doing the thing. Though you think you know it, you have no certainty until you try. Lot of us are under the impression that I know something, but it's only when I try that I find out my knowledge is inadequate. My inadequacy of knowledge comes out only in my experience. These two ideas that came from Einstein, that everything else is information, knowledge comes from experience, and Sophocles saying that you have to try your hand at it, and then only you'll find out whether you know or not. These five people were influenced by this thought. John Dewey, the great American educationist, who gave us a beautiful definition of education which fits in our today's presentation. He said, education is reorientation and reorganization of human experience. Whatever human beings experience during their journey of life, from birth till death, whatever they experience, they reconstruct this experience, reorient this experience, reorganize this experience, and that is their education. And later on, he modified this definition by saying, education is life. It's not only experience of life, but life itself. On the right-hand side, we have Jean Piaget, the great biologist, zoologist, I should say, the man who studied walrus. And from walrus, he came to a theory of episteme. He gave us the theory of knowledge. Very difficult to study, very hard to study, ask me. It took me 6 to 7 years to study even some of his early chapters on language development or on operations, or on the 4 stages of learning, which you call as pre-operational, concrete operational, formal and operational. Piaget is from the Geneva school of thought, and we call him a cognitive psychologist. So this is a cognitive theory. Then we have David Cope, the man who studied Dewey, was influenced greatly by him. He studied Jean Piaget, also was influenced by his cognitive way of thinking, looking at the holistic picture like Kohler and Kafka and Steiner. And he was also influenced, like you and me, by the classical conditioning theories or the instrumental conditioning theories of Pavlov and Skinner. He had studied all this, and he thought that there is need for giving a theory of learning and teaching, which can be more practical, and a combination of both the Pavlovian conditioning of behavior psychology and the Piagetian theory of cognitive psychology. Then we have Kurt Lewin, another great psychologist, and Phil Race. Phil Race worked with David Cope. Even after David Cope left talking about experiential learning, Phil Race talked of experiential learning at the university level. He was more interested in higher education. Whereas Kurt Lewin gave us his own theories of learning, which were based on vectors, a mathematical theory of learning, psychologist. Well, these 5 people joined hands together, and we had, in the words of John Dewey, that when a person is involved in an activity, he evaluates that activity, he reflects upon that activity, and decides as to what things in that activity were useful to him. He does a kind of an analysis of the activity, and this information that he gains from this activity or this experience, he uses this information in another activity. Now look at this very carefully. First one is doing or having an activity for an experience, reflecting upon that experience. The third thing is developing a general theory which becomes a part of my theory of life. And the fourth is then executing that in real life. This is what John Dewey said. Now let me look at the learning pyramid. Many of you know that like laws of learning, we have laws of forgetting also. Laws of forgetting. We do not remember everything that's being taught to us. We forget most of it. We do not retain it. Whatever we learn immediately goes to our short-term memory. If later on we come home and we practice those concepts, we review those concepts, we do this practice again and again within the first 3-4 hours or within the first 24 hours, the chances are that we will retain this information for a long period of time. So forgetting, as per Ebbinghaus, who gave us the first law of forgetting, he said that whatever you teach a person, within 24 hours, he is bound to forget 70 to 80% of it. Only what remains is 20 to 30%, depending on your brain capacity and how you learned. You will not be able to have more than 20% with you retained information. Now, there are methodologies which help in retention. If you lecture to a child, he will retain 5%, only 95% he is sure to forget. If you read out to him or make him read, he will retain 10%. 90% he will forget. If you use all audiovisual aids in teaching him, he will be able to retain. I'm not talking of how much will he learn. How much will he retain in his brain after learning will be 20%, 80% will be lost. If you demonstrate it in the laboratory or in the class or with your gestures and postures, he will retain about 30%. But if you get him to do some peer work, if you put him into 2s and from 2s to 4s, and if you get him into groups and make him discuss it with his friends, the likelihood is that he will retain 50% of this information. And if he practices it himself on a laptop, on a computer, in the lab, or goes out and practices it in the open, you are there by his side, guiding him, guiding his conduct of practice. The chances are that his learning will go up to 75% in terms of retention. And you may ask me, sir, do you remember all this? We didn't see you consulting any notes. You don't have a book in your hand. But I have been teaching this for the past 30-40 years now. I must have taught it 100 times. And when you teach something 100 times to others, you do not lose that information. It stays 90%. Talk to my daughters and granddaughters. They'll tell you when daddy is teaching, we don't disturb him. Why? because he will hold us by the hand and tell us, I have a lecture tomorrow, sit here. I want to teach this to you so that I remember 90% of it. So they run away. Don't disturb daddy, he will disturb us. So if you want something to be retained in the brain longer, the best method is discussion, practice by doing, and then teaching it to others. Now let me take you back to your B.Ed class. For a little while, you will enjoy growing a little younger. Think of your B.Ed class when you are teacher of psychology, the lecturer of psychology, educational psychology. He taught you about Pavlov. I will remind you, he taught you about that dog who used to salivate when he would see food. And when there was no food, there was no saliva. And then he started ringing a bell, but ringing of the bell did not cause any salivation. Then the ringing of the bell and the food were brought together. So two stimuli were combined to get the same response of salivation. After repeated practice of a month, no food was brought, only the bell was rung, the saliva occurred. This was his theory of conditioned response. Again, our B.F. Skinner, he said to us in a beautiful sentence, give me a child and tell me what you want to make him, I will make him. He was talking of successive approximation, a term in psychology. He was talking of shaping of behavior. He was talking that through reinforcement, by rewarding a child, rewarding an operant response of the child, I will be able to make him repeat that action again and again. What do the behaviorists believe? The behaviorist psychologists believe that learning happens only when there is some type of a permanent change in the behavior of a child as a result of his experience. Whatever the child has experienced, it should stay permanently in his brain. But they do not trust this change unless it is exhibited by the child in terms of overt behavior. Oh, you may say, sir, I have understood everything. Then answer my questions. It's only when you answer my questions that I can see whether your understanding has been developed or not. I want you to classify certain objects. I put the objects on the table, and if you are able to classify them, well, I am seeing it in your overt behavior. The change has really occurred. So whatever the number of conditioning experiences, whatever the number of stimuli given, whatever the number of responses that come from an individual, ultimately what is important is that the change in behavior must occur. If the change in behavior has occurred because of a stimuli or a conditioned stimuli, we believe that this change will stay, it will be relatively permanent. That's what the behavioral theory goes. We are combining both these theories. On the left hand side, you see the picture of the dog. The first one is an unconditioned response. Food is brought, he salivates. Now, there is a neutral bell being brought. There is no salivation. Now, both the bell and the food are combined together for a longer period of time, maybe a month. One stimuli, another stimuli, we call it generalization of or association of stimuli. The response is salivation. Then after some days, there is no food, only the bell is rung, and the dog in the expectancy of getting food starts salivating. That was Pavlovian experiment. The Skinner's was far more interesting. You know, he made two parrots, pigeons, I'm sorry, not parrots. He made two pigeons play table tennis. How was it possible? You will say, sir, it's not possible. No, he watched their behavior. Whenever a pigeon performed an action which was good, he turned it, he hit the ball. The pigeon was given a pellet of food. Here you see an experiment in which a rat is put, and if he presses the right kind of levers, a pellet of food drops. That's the reward. Now he starts thinking after 2-3 pellets drop, which one have I to press? So he starts learning how to press the levers till the gate is opened and he can come out of this trap. The reverse of this behavioristic theory is the cognitive theory. The cognitive theory says behavior is too atomistic. We need not judge a person in terms of his stimuli and response. We need to judge the whole picture. A person looks at the whole, not at the parts. So there are some mental processes that go on, and the learner tries to make meaning of those mental processes. There's a technical term, I'm trying to avoid those words. They call them operations, mental operations. Piaget called them schemas, S-C-H-E-M-A-S. You may read them as schemas. He called them schemas. So the person, what does he do? He gets an information. He converts this information into a kind of a problem. he uses this problem to find answer to his other questions. So it's more problem solving approach that he uses. In cognition, it's not only acquisition of information, but solving of problems, and that solving of problems becomes the firework of his model making. The stimuli works on his brain. The brain starts assimilating information, accommodating his pattern of thought to that information, and then responding after looking at the whole picture, not at one stimuli. Two different theories, one from Pavlov and Skinner, the other from Kohler and Kafka. The example is here. You must be reminded today of your B.Ed class when Kohler and Kafka put that ape in a cage and they hung a banana from the top and they left two small cylindrical rods on the ground. The poor ape tried with his both rods, he couldn't reach them. But then suddenly the wisdom dawned on him when he thought for a little while. He had struggled for half an hour. He saw that one rod was smaller in diameter and it could fit into the other. And when he fit this one, he got a bigger rod, a lengthier rod, and he was able to pull down the banana. And now you see this, the picture on the left is the experiment. The picture on the right is the knowledge acquired by him of that whole. He is transferring it into his real life. He manages to get a bamboo stick from somewhere to pull down the bananas. What is experiential learning now? A combination of both of them. We have 4 stages of this experiential learning. We'll call it EL. Some people call it ELT also, but I wouldn't confuse that with English language teaching. It's experiential learning teaching. We provide the child with an experience. He has to do something. We call it a concrete experience. It's not something, imagine you are so and so. No. He must have an experience that is tangible, that can be felt, that can be seen with the eyes. That's what concrete experience is. He has to do something. Now, when he has done this, it may take him 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour. He comes back, he joins the whole group, and he discusses this experience in the group. He speaks about this experience. He is questioned on his experience, and he questions others on their experiences. So there's a reflection, there's an introspection, there's a reviewing going on based on that very experience. So 2 stages are over. An experience, and after having come back from the activity, there's a group discussion, there's a reflection, there's an introspection. So some kind of reflective observation has been done. And now, on the basis of that, he draws certain conclusions. What did I learn from this experience? What did I learn from the actual experience, and then from the discussion and introspection on the experience? From this, he forms certain concepts. They are not tangible as yet. They are not real concepts as yet. They are abstract. I would say he doesn't formulate laws. He formulates only abstractions. He theorizes. He says this must have been this. That's why it happened like this. And now that he has a theory, it's not proved as yet. He goes out and he starts experimenting again. Using the theory that he has, he puts this theory into practice. He is trying out what he has learned now. So he did something first. He reflected on it next. He made a concept of what he had learned, developed a theory, and now he goes out and he executes that plan that he has. In these 4 stages, the learning theory gets complete. Well, that's so far philosophy. Let's bring it nearer now. Experiential learning is a combination of both learning theories. It takes the behavior learning into consideration, and it takes the cognitive learning also into consideration. It also focuses on learning by doing, but it does not end there. Learning by doing is important because learning by doing gives you an experience. But thinking and reflecting on that experience is more important. Theorizing on that experience is far more important than applying the knowledge gained in another experience is the ultimate stage. So what happens? What did David Cope say to us? He said, this will be a cycle with 4 stages. You provide the child with a real life experience related to your topic, relevant to your content, with a specific objective of what you want to teach. Give him an experience. It could be a classroom experience or out of the class experience. Then, when the experience has been given for 10, 20, 30 minutes, give him another 10, 20 minutes to reflect on the experience. Not lonely, not all alone, although introspection is done all alone. But here the critical reflection is done in the company of all others, because majority of children had the same experience. They were made to go through the same experiential activity. Therefore, they will all have their own impressions, and let the child know the impressions of others also. That will be the learning for him. He will know how others are reacting to this experience, what they watched, what they saw, what they experienced, what they are reflecting upon. He shares his reflection with them, so he is wiser. They say two fools are better than a wise man. So when more than two children share their experiences, they gather a lot of information. They come to the third stage, which is on the right hand side, drop down, abstract conceptualization. He thinks, I had an experience, I went round, I saw a river flowing by, I saw its water was not as clear, it was carrying some mud also along with it. Possibly it was because it must have rained in the mountains, or possibly it could be because there was some soil erosion. And now as they are discussing, there are 20 more causes that are given by the children in the experience reflection part of it. And abstract concept is that a river has several stages. It flows from the top level to the middle level and then finally merges into the sea. As it comes from the mountains, it brings with it rocks. As it moves into the plains, it becomes wider and its speed increases, and it carries a lot of soil from the two banks or the two shores, which it keeps on eroding. So this abstract conceptualization on his part is that a river always erodes the soil. Perhaps we need to plant more trees on the banks of the river, or we need to give it a bund on both the sides. Now with this abstract conceptualization, he goes and says, how do I prevent the river flowing by the side of a city or by the side of our own school from eroding into our campus, or for washing away the banks of our campus? He is now on to active experimentation. So David Cope, what did he want? He wanted that while you take up a chapter in your hand, you give an experience to the children related to that content. Let them have this experience, which is a physical experience. River rafting, he's learning about currents. He's learning about the flow of water. He's learning about physics, that to every action there is equal and opposite reaction. He is learning this, he is experiencing this, he is enjoying rafting. I'm talking of freshwater rafting, river water rafting, where there are no dangers at all. There are no boulders, there are no rocks. As he has gone for this experience, he comes back, let them reflect. They say, we all enjoyed it. What was fun? The water flowing and we were trying to go against the current. Oh, that's lovely. Did it require more effort when you went against the current or when you flowed with the current? No, it required more effort. Much greater effort when you flow against the current. But it's only the dead who flow with the current. It's only the fish that flow against the current. They don't flow with the current. The critical reflection is done in a group now on this experience, and they develop a concept that if we want to row a boat in fresh water, we must all row together. Our rowing must be synchronous. It must be synchronized that 10 of us, 12 of us, 8 of us are rowing together. And next time when they go for a boating expedition and they have to win a race, they are all rowing. At the command of one, everybody dips his row, and at the command of order 2, everybody lifts his oar. So they are all rowing together. That's an experience that they have gained. Please remember 4 parts here, 4 sentences written at the bottom, very easy. We always think that learning is a process that happens in the brain of the child. It is true, it happens. Learning is definitely a process. I won't say it's not a process. It's best conceived as a process, but not in terms of outcomes. Unfortunately, we have always measured learning in terms of only outcomes. Outcome would be the product. MLOs, RLOs, they would be the product of learning, but don't measure learning in terms of outcomes only. Learning is a process. If you give the child the process of learning, you have made him a lifelong learner. Then second, learning is always a continuous process. It never halts. It continues from life to death. And every experience of your life teaches you. Every experience keeps on teaching you. And learning is a kind of adjustment. You look at the situation in which we are living nowadays, for example. I mean, it's a chaotic kind of a situation. We had never had any experience, nor had anybody else in the world any experience, but we have adapted to the situations. We know there will be new normals, new ways of life, new ways of greeting people. We have found out a new value in family life because we have spent more time with our families. So it's a kind of adaptation. So learning always is adaptation, but when you look at the big picture, not at stimuli and response. And at the same time, when a person interacts with the environment affects him. I was once asked a question, Professor Ando, how would you define intelligence? I said, sir, intelligence is the capability of a person to change the environment to his liking. He said, is that all? I said, no, sir, I didn't complete my definition. Either he changes the environment to suit himself, or he changes himself to adapt to the environment. And anybody who does either of these two is an intelligent person. So there is always a transaction between the environment and the person. And whenever the person acts on the environment, he is able to transact his business and learning goes on. How do we define this in simple words? I'm sure some of my teachers are waiting for this. Experiential learning is one of those categories wherein teaching methods and activities, they involve the learner in the learning process. They don't involve him as a silent, mute spectator. They don't involve him by sitting in his chair. They involve him actively in the whole learning process. He gets an opportunity for the first time to have an experience, and he learns through that experience. You can see here an experience which is outdoor. Although it's not a teacher provided experience, doesn't matter, it's a parent provided experience. The children are engaged in experiential learning in a learning environment which is physical, it is tangible. The child is holding something, looking at something, he can catch hold of something, he can taste it or test it. And he develops a broader understanding of the concept when this kind of learning happens in the real physical world than in the artificial four walls of a classroom, where experiences of this nature cannot be provided. We move further, and I try to explain whatever I talked till now through a video. I'm trying to play it, Dr. Saab. Don't get disturbed. I'm trying to play it, but maybe it's embedded properly. I checked it up in the morning. I'll go back one slide again. Come back to this slide. I'm sorry, I will have to stop sharing and go to the video itself.
Yes, sir.
It may take me a little time. We'll move back, move ahead. I won't wait for it. I won't wait for it because otherwise I will have to stop everything. Sir, am I on recording?
Sir, you are on recording.
Arora ji, is this being recorded?
Yes, sir, it is being recorded. Are you hear me? It is being recorded.
Arora ji,
it
is it being recorded? I can't hear you.
Yes, sir, it is being recorded.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, there are 9 things about which I would like to talk to you. 9 things, 9 keys. The first one, whenever you engage the children in an experiential activity, please see that the content and the process of that activity are balanced. The experiences given to the children should be based on the concept that you are going to teach, and it should be based on the learning theories. Don't move away, so far away from the experience, from the content, that they lose sight of the content and the experience becomes more valid than the content itself. The second, whenever the children get time to engage themselves in any activity, please see that the environment in which they are working is safe and give them space. Don't keep on supervising them. Don't stand over their heads and shoulders. Don't keep an eye on them always. Let them get a safe environment. Let them get an environment where they have space to discuss it, because after the experience, they will have to introspect. The third is, every time the experience is given to them, it should add some meaning to the content. Let me see if I am able to play this video. No. Sir, what do I do under the circumstances? Arora ji will have to help me. Will you advise me? You see, if I go
Sir, I
back,
think we have to go to these videos from the main source.
I will have to stop sharing then. They will have to give me a minute
Doesn't
or
matter,
two.
sir. Doesn't matter. The earlier one also
Give me a
and this
minute
one
or two,
also.
because I will have to go not to Alexa, advanced sharing, basic sharing.
Meanwhile, I request everybody, if they have any questions, they may write it on the chat box. We'll be able to help you.
You could pass them on meanwhile.
You're also requested those participants who have written their brand telephone numbers, please write your names. Please write your names, otherwise you are likely to be removed from the meeting.
Someone has joined as with the identity as O or 0. 3 times have been requested to give the ID. No change has been made. If you please tell us, we'll be making it for you. Tell us your name, we'll be making it or correcting it for you.
There is another participant with iPhone. Please write your name.
It has taken me some time, but I think I have succeeded at last.
But share that.
Please start, sir, if you have got it. As Shivaji has already said, one participant who has written only 0 in place of his name or her name, please put your name. Otherwise, you are likely to be.
Let us know your name. Let us know your name. We'll correct it.
You can speak out your name. We shall do the needful. Participant with name as 0 or O. If you are not in
Get your learners thinking about and talking about the results
So
of
can you hear
doing
this?
them too.
Can you hear this now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let's try this, sir.
This is the Humber Center for Teaching and Learning How To, the experiential learning model. Aristotle said that for the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. It was true then and it's true now. Experiential learning, put simply, is learning by doing. Following the experiential learning model when designing instruction can help maximize our learners' understanding of important concepts. The experiential learning model consists of first doing, then reflecting on it, then applying what was learned to another situation. Then we repeat the cycle, each time adding difficulty or refining our skills. The experiential learning model consists of a 5-step cycle. Here it is right here. Step 1. Experience. Experience the activity. This is learning by doing, after all. Have your learner perform a task. Step 2. Share. Share the results. Describe the experience. Get your learners thinking about and talking about the results, the reactions, and sharing this publicly. Step 3. Process. This is where you examine how the learning process works. Have your learners examine and discuss and analyze the experience and then reflect on it. Step 4. Generalize. Your learners need to be able to connect this experience to other real-world examples. Step 5. Apply. Now your learners should be able to take what they learned from this experience and apply it to a similar or different situation. And when we apply something to a new situation, we get to experience the activity all over again. We find ourselves back at step 1, and the experiential learning cycle repeats itself. Experience, share, process, generalize, apply. It really works. Try it today. Get your learners doing, reflecting, applying, and then doing again. Thanks, and if you'd like to learn more,
I'll take you to the other video also.
Make meaning, sir.
I want you to go through this was the first one. The second one that I missed.
Is make meaning.
That was make meaning. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Shagufta Rashid was in front of me, so I could not play the video.
Hello and welcome to the short module on making learning
you see
meaningful
this?
for children. In this module, you'll gain new knowledge and skills, and you'll hear about the ways that teachers plan activities and interactions that
Can you
support
see this
children's
now?
understanding of the
No,
world
sir,
around
no.
them.
We are not able
Making
to see.
learning meaningful
Just a
fits
minute.
into the foundation of our house. The house framework helps us think about, plan for, and use teaching practices.
You mean you are not able to see this video?
Screen is not seen, sir.
So we can hear the voice of the video, but
Yes, now we can hear
You
you.
can hear the voice. No, give me a little time. Give me a
we
minute.
can hear only the voice, but video is not.
You couldn't see it.
Sir, excuse
Hello
me.
and welcome to the short module on making learning
stop
meaningful for
sharing,
children.
then you go, sir.
In this module,
Because,
you'll
the
gain
video
new
is playing
knowledge and
somewhere.
skills, and you'll
Can
hear
you see
about the
the
ways
video
that
now
teachers
or not?
planned activities and interactions that support
Stop
children's
sharing.
understanding of the world
I
around.
got
Yeah.
it. I got it, Vitya. You are asking that I must.
Hello and welcome to the
Now you go. You can see the video.